During the worst storm in years, while others followed evacuation orders, one man stayed behind. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But when the radios went silent and the last rescue truck sat idle, he grabbed the keys and drove straight into the flood. By the time the rain slowed and the cameras caught up, 17 children were alive because of him. This unforgettable story honors the quiet strength of those who act when others freeze. A powerful reminder that in moments of crisis, the bravest decisions are the ones made alone. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky was already bruised with storm. Elliot Grant wiped his hands on a faded rag, squinting toward the horizon where the clouds rolled in low and slow like they had purpose. At 63, his knees popped more than the trucks he worked on, but he still moved like a man who didn't know how to sit still. He wasn't supposed to be there, not officially. The evacuation order had come in 3 hours ago. Civilians, part-timers, all sent home. But Elliot had stayed, crouched beneath the skeleton of a 5-ton transport in the corner of the motor pool, adjusting a rusted line like the storm outside was just background noise. "You deaf or just stubborn?" Sergeant Lynn yelled, stepping over a coil of hose with her radio buzzing against her hip. "Orders were clear, Mr. Grant. Everyone out. That includes you." Elliot didn't look up. He just muttered, "Storm's coming. These trucks need to move, not sit here like drowned lawn ornaments." She sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I get it. You care. But we've got protocols and we're not risking civilians just because you're sentimental about diesel." "Not sentiment," Elliot said, finally standing and stretching his back with a crack. "Responsibility." Lynn hesitated. There was something about the way he said it. Calm, final, like a man who didn't need a uniform to understand duty. "You've got 10 minutes, she said finally, turning back toward the exit. "Then I want you gone. Storm's been upgraded. Celine's coming in fast." Elliot nodded but didn't watch her go. His eyes drifted to the transport's front tire, then to the key ring hanging by the office door. 5 keys, 4 mechanics gone. Just him now. Behind him, the emergency radio crackled again. Another report of rising waters in the valley. One of the med techs had mentioned a school sheltering in place. No transport. Elliot listened with one ear, his hands already back on the tools. He wasn't thinking about chains of command or consequences or what the sergeant might say if she came back and found him still there. He was thinking about the brakes and the fuel lines and the kids. The wind began howling an hour later, rattling the steel shutters like they were made of paper. Most of the base had gone silent, except for the occasional radio crackle and the moan of distant sirens. Elliot finished tightening the last bolt and leaned back, muscles aching. The transport was ready. Clean lines, full tank, brakes checked, tires treated. Then the call came in. "Base command, this is Station 4. Riverside Elementary is compromised. Repeat, compromised. Water rising at 6 inches per hour, second floor occupied. 22 individuals, mostly children." Elliot froze. He knew the school. Low ground, terrible drainage. If flood maps were right, it'd be underwater before sunrise. "Do we have a unit en route?" a panicked voice asked through the radio. "Negative. All licensed operators are on the eastern perimeter. Closest driver is 30 miles out." Another voice chimed in. "We've got 1 5-ton truck operational. No driver on site." Elliot's gaze shifted to the dispatch board where the key still hung. The last truck, the one he just tuned up, sat by the bay door, humming quietly like it knew what it was built for. He moved before thinking. Keys, gloves, jacket. The door groaned as he pushed it open, wind slamming into his chest like a challenge. Rain had arrived in full fury now, sheets of water slapping concrete, stinging his skin. The ignition coughed once, then roared. Elliot smiled. She was ready. At the gate, a young corporal waved wildly, shouting over the storm. "You don't have clearance! Sir, you can't take that vehicle!" Elliot didn't brake. The tires tore through knee-high water as the truck surged forward, its frame groaning against the weight and wind. The radio inside the cab screamed with static and angry voices. "Who's driving that truck? That's not one of ours. Stop that vehicle, stop him!" But Elliot wasn't listening. He had a road in his head, a mission in his hands, and a voice from years ago whispering what to do when no one else moved. Inside the command center, panic was unfolding by the second. Officers circled the central table, radios blaring, voices overlapping, screens flickered, many already lost to wind and rain damage. Only one camera remained stable, a grainy feed from a tower cam showing a lone military transport barreling through waterlogged streets. "Identify the driver," barked Colonel Wade Ransom, slamming a fist on the edge of the table. "No vehicle should be moving without explicit command approval." A young lieutenant squinted at the monitor, flipping through dispatch logs. "Sir, that's the 5-ton from Bay 2. It was serviced by civilian techs. No driver assigned. Looks like..." He hesitated, swallowed. "It's Elliot Grant, sir." "The mechanic?" Ransom's voice cracked. "He's not even active duty. Retired Air Force, works part-time. No clearance to operate. This is an unauthorized deployment of federal property in a state of emergency. That man is a liability. Get him back. Now!" But not everyone in the room shared his fury. At the far end of the command tent, a tall woman in soaked fatigues leaned closer to the monitor. Her collar bore 4 stars. General Audrey Quinn said nothing at first, her eyes tracking the truck as it swerved past a fallen street lamp and powered through a current that would have stopped lighter vehicles cold. She recognized the name, Grant. "Ma'am," Ransom said, voice tightening, "I suggest immediate interception. If that truck goes down, we lose over $1 million in equipment and possibly civilian lives." Quinn didn't blink. "I said hold." On screen, the camera feed juddered. For a second, the truck disappeared in a wall of water, then re-emerged, headlights cutting through the storm like searchlights. "Where's he heading?" Quinn asked. "Riverside Elementary," someone answered quietly. No one spoke after that. The school stood like an island in a sea of chaos. Water had already reached the second set of stairs, and sheets of rain pounded the brick exterior. On the rooftop, a cluster of soaked children huddled under tarps with 2 teachers, terrified, clutching the kids like life preservers. Elliot brought the truck to a halt as close as he could. The engine groaned but held. The building groaned louder. He climbed onto the roof of the cab, hands gripping wet steel as wind tore at his jacket. "Start sending them down," he shouted, voice barely carrying through the storm. One of the teachers shook her head. "We can't. They're scared." "Then I'll come to them." He leapt onto the outer stair railing, every inch of it slick and swaying. Slowly, he climbed until he reached the edge of the roof. The first child, a girl no older than 6, trembled in front of him. She wore a pink raincoat and clutched a stuffed animal soaked to the stuffing. Elliot crouched. "You ever jump into a pool before?" he asked with a smile. She nodded faintly. "This is just like that, except this time I'm the water." She jumped. He caught her, passed her to a teacher standing partway down. Again and again, child after child. 12, 13, 14. Then came the crack. A section of the rooftop gave way. One of the teachers screamed. A boy slipped, flailing toward the edge. Without hesitation, Elliot dove, disappearing below the railing into a wall of white water. In the command center, voices gasped. The feed glitched. On screen, a shape broke the surface. Elliot, soaked and bleeding from his temple, held the boy in his left arm while his right clawed against the current. Inch by inch, he kicked toward the truck. The base went silent. Ransom looked ready to scream, but Quinn simply watched. Her eyes never left the screen as the last child was lifted through the truck's hatch. And for the first time all night, she smiled. The rain slowed, but it didn't stop. It softened into a steady curtain, quiet enough now for the sound of the truck's engine to echo against the base walls as it pulled through the gates. Elliot's hands were trembling by the time he shifted into neutral. His foot hovered over the brake for a moment too long, then slipped. The transport rolled gently to a stop as uniformed personnel swarmed the vehicle. Medics rushed forward, pulling open the back hatch. Small hands reached out. One by one, the children were lifted into waiting blankets. Their eyes darted in all directions, wide and dazed, as if they couldn't decide whether to cry or cheer. No one noticed the driver. Elliot slumped forward, his forehead resting against the wheel. Blood, water, and exhaustion clung to him in equal parts. Someone shouted for help, but it wasn't for him. Cameras clicked. Parents wept. A flood of movement swallowed the scene while Elliot sat still, letting the chaos pass over him like an old stone in a riverbed. Two military police officers approached cautiously. Their ponchos flapped in the wind, and their boots splashed through shallow puddles. One of them leaned down. "Mr. Grant?" Elliot looked up slowly, eyes glassy. "We're going to need you to come with us," the officer said, tone neutral. "There's been a violation of protocol involving unauthorized operation of a tactical vehicle during a declared emergency." Elliot blinked. "You're not under arrest, sir. Just ordered to report. Colonel Ransom wants to speak with you immediately." They helped him out of the car. His legs buckled and they caught him under each arm. A medic tried to intervene, but the MPs waved her off. Elliot said nothing, just nodded faintly as they walked him toward the holding wing behind the command center. The room they placed him in was a converted storage closet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A military blanket was draped over his shoulders, and someone had taped a gauze patch across the gash above his eyebrow. The rest of him was still soaked. He sat alone, back straight, arms folded, waiting for whatever came next. The door opened with a quiet creak. Elliot expected ransom, expected shouting, maybe even a threat of court-martial, even if he wasn't active duty. What he didn't expect was the woman who ducked through the frame, water still dripping from the hem of her jacket. General Audrey Quinn. When the door clicked shut, Quinn stood there for a moment, just watching him. "You always that stubborn, Grant?" Elliot blinked. "I didn't know you knew my name." "You tuned up my first Humvee," she said, walking slowly to the metal chair opposite him. "Balad Air Base, 1991. Engine block was a disaster. Everyone said it was scrap. You brought it back." He searched her face. "You were the captain with the broken wrist," he said slowly. She smiled just a little. "And later in Mosul, my convoy hit an IED. My driver was dead. Everyone froze. You didn't." "I remember dragging someone out of the wreck," Elliot murmured. "Didn't know it was you." "I never forgot." For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the distant hum of generators and the soft drip of water from her sleeves onto the tile. "You saved 17 children today," she said finally, "against orders, in a stolen military transport." Elliot met her gaze, calm. "Did what needed doing, ma'am." Quinn nodded, stood up, and opened the door. "To hell with protocols, release him. Immediately." She turned back to Elliot. "You have my personal authorization, retroactive, for the use of any vehicle on this base during an emergency. That clear?" Elliot stood slowly, knees stiff but steady. "Yes, General." By morning, the footage had made its way to every corner of the internet. Grainy, rain-slick video showed a lone truck powering through flooded streets. Another clip, shot from a nearby overpass, captured the moment Elliot leapt into the water to save the girl. 17 lives, all pulled from a collapsing rooftop by a man with no orders and no hesitation. Reporters showed up at the base gate before sunrise. By noon, there were satellite vans, interview requests, and offers from 3 national news outlets. Some wanted exclusives. One even promised a book deal. But Elliot was nowhere to be found. Not in the barracks, not in the infirmary, not even in the admin wing where base officials scrambled to prepare a press conference. They found him in the motor pool, alone, back under the same truck he'd driven through the flood. A busted rear axle had cracked when it slammed into submerged debris. He had a wrench in one hand and a chipped coffee mug resting on the floor beside him. The public affairs officer looked ready to burst. "Mr. Grant, they're setting up microphones. There are children waiting, families. The general's expecting you." Elliot didn't look up. "It wasn't about me." "Sir, the governor wants to present a medal." "No need. They want to name a street after you." "I'm fine where I am." There was a long silence. "You saved 17 lives," the officer said quietly. Elliot finally looked at him, eyes tired but steady. "I didn't do it for medals. Didn't do it for interviews. I did it because no one else moved." The officer nodded, quietly retreating. By nightfall, the cameras had packed up. The press conference was canceled. The children were safe. The rain had stopped. But Elliot was still in the garage, his hands stained with grease, his sleeves rolled high, and his heart still exactly where it had been before the storm ever came. A week later, without fanfare, a new sign appeared at the entrance to the motor pool. It was simple, metal, and cleanly engraved. The Grant Motor Facility. in service of those who never stopped. Elliot didn't attend the unveiling. He was under a truck again, elbows deep in a half-assembled drivetrain. When the general herself walked in to hand him the commemorative plaque, he wiped his hands on a rag and said, "Thanks," without stopping his work. She watched him for a moment before placing the plaque on his tool bench, next to a stack of old maintenance logs and a half-eaten granola bar. "You know," she said gently, "we never did ask why you stayed behind when the others evacuated." Elliot shrugged. Didn't feel right leaving with half the truck still torn apart. Even with a storm like Celine on the horizon? I've seen worse. My father drove through Hurricane Camille in a Jeep with a cracked transmission just to deliver medical supplies. Figured I could handle one more storm. Quinn tilted her head. "Your father served?" "Army, long before me. Never talked much about it, but I remember his hands, always fixing something." She nodded, then quietly turned to go. At the door, she paused. "You may not want medals, but the ones you saved, they won't forget." That evening, as the sky began to clear for the first time in days, a young private hesitated outside the garage before stepping in. He was nervous, barely 20, uniform too crisp, voice cracking. "Sir?" Elliot didn't glance up from the engine block. "I heard what you did. My sister, she was at that school." The private's hands shook slightly. "I just wanted to say thank you." Elliot tightened a bolt, then finally looked up. "That's what I should do. If it were someone else, I would have done the same. To me, every life matters. I understand what it feels like to lose someone you love." Time moved on as it always did. The headlines faded. The storm was cataloged in weather reports and news archives, filed somewhere between record rainfall and emergency response metrics. But the 17 children didn't forget. Every year on the anniversary of the flood, the motor pool received exactly 17 postcards. Handwritten, sometimes messy, sometimes with crayon, but always signed with a little heart or a sketch of the truck. "Still riding bikes because of you. Learning mechanics this year. You're my hero, Mr. Grant." Elliot never answered them. He just opened each one, read in silence, then placed it gently into a small box he kept on the top shelf of his locker. No one knew how often he looked through them. Some guessed it was often. Others figured he didn't need to. He remembered every name. One of the older girls enlisted 3 years later. She trained as a Chinook pilot, ferrying supplies into disaster zones across the world. On the back of her helmet, she painted a tiny wrench. No one else knew why it was there. She never explained. Elliot saw a photo of it once. Someone had shown it to him on their phone, proud that the base had inspired her. He only nodded and said, "She'll do just fine." In the motor pool, things carried on. Trucks came and went. Storms came and went too. But Elliot remained. He still arrived at sunrise, still refused coffee that wasn't black, still whistled quietly while fixing things no one else wanted to touch. Above his bench, tucked between faded newspaper clippings and a checklist of torque specs, was a single piece of yellow tape holding up a newspaper quote from a Pentagon press briefing. It read, "In a true crisis, protocol pauses. Character never does." One quiet afternoon, General Quinn walking the length of the base alone. The wind was calm, the sun low, and the faint sound of a socket wrench echoed from the garage. She stepped inside, stopping just beyond the threshold. Elliot was there. Same jacket, same boots, same deliberate hands tightening the bolts on a truck he'd fixed a dozen times before. She didn't speak. After a while, he looked up and grinned faintly. "You lost another driver?" he asked. "Something like that," she replied. She stepped closer, glancing around at the tools, the oil stains, the neat rows of parts that looked chaotic to most, but made perfect sense to him. "I approved the renaming officially last week," she said. Elliot tilted his head. "The Grant Motor Facility." He didn't react, just went back to the truck. "I figured it was good publicity," he said lightly. Quinn smiled. "It's legacy." He paused, tightening one last bolt before lowering the jack with slow, practiced care. "My father once told me," he said quietly, "you don't serve to be remembered. You serve so others get to keep going." She nodded, eyes softening. "Your father would be so proud." Elliot shrugged. He never said much, but I think he'd understand. They stood in silence for a moment longer, The kind of silence that didn't need filling, just presence, just peace. Later that night, when the base grew quiet and the tools were put away, Elliot opened his locker and pulled down the box of postcards. He didn't read them. He didn't need to. He just held the box for a moment, then placed it back gently on the shelf. Then he turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked out into the dark with the kind of quiet that only those who have truly served ever carry.